Imagine biting into a cracker so hard it could crack your teeth, only to find live maggots crawling inside. That was breakfast in the Civil War. Between 1861 and 1865, more than 3 million men marched into the muddiest, bloodiest conflict America had ever seen, and the enemy they feared most was not the rifle or the cannon. It was the ration box. In the trenches outside Petersburg, in the swamps of the Mississippi, and in the freezing camps of the Shenandoah, Union and Confederate soldiers tore open wooden crates that smelled of mold, grease, and rot. They huddled around smoking campfires and forced themselves to swallow food so vile it would make a modern stomach turn inside out. These are the 10 foods so disgusting they killed more men than bullets ever did. Number 10. Hardtack, the worm castles. It was nothing more than flour and water baked into a square cracker, but it was baked so dense that soldiers swore it could stop a musket ball. Men used it as a writing tablet. They used it as a roof shingle. They cracked it open with rifle butts because their teeth would not do the job. The official name was hardtack. The soldiers called it tooth duller, sheet iron cracker, and worst of all, worm castle. Every box that came down from the great northern bakeries in Baltimore and Philadelphia arrived swarming with weevils and maggots that had bored tunnels straight through the dough. One Union private sat down on a log near Cold Harbor, broke open his ration, and counted 32 worms wriggling out of a single cracker. Veterans learned quickly to eat their hardtack in the dark, dunked in coffee, without ever looking down. As one soldier put it, it was a good way to prevent troublesome ideas. The maggots, at least, added a little protein. Number 9. Salt pork, known across both armies as salt horse. It came packed in massive wooden barrels that leaked greasy brine onto the wagon floors as they bumped down country roads. By the time it reached the men, it was streaked yellow, glistening with rancid fat, and so saturated with salt that a soldier had to tie it to a string and soak it overnight in a creek before he could even chew it. Even then, it was often crawling with worms and giving off a smell that made green soldiers vomit on the spot. They called it salt horse, salt junk, and old mule, and there were whispers throughout the camps that some of those barrels really did hold horse, mule, or worse. Lee's men in the wilderness pulled hunks of it out and held it to the firelight, watching the maggots drop into the flames before they ate what was left. Number 8. Desiccated vegetables, which the soldiers bitterly renamed desecrated vegetables. Some army quartermaster, trying to fight the epidemic of scurvy sweeping through the ranks, had carrots, turnips, beets, cabbage, and onions chopped, pressed, and dried into hard square bricks. When the men dropped these bricks into an iron camp kettle of boiling water, the vegetables expanded into a slimy green sludge that floated with stems, stalks, and unidentifiable fibers. One Union officer wrote that it tasted like a dirty brook with dead leaves floating in it. The smell was that of stagnant swamp water. Soldiers held their noses and choked it down, or more often, dumped it on the ground and went without, which only deepened the vitamin deficiencies that were rotting their gums and loosening their teeth. Number 7. Skilly-gally, the trench treat. When hardtack was simply too hard, when even soaking in coffee could not soften it, a soldier resorted to skilly-gally. He took his cracker, smashed it with the butt of his rifle, soaked the crumbs in water until they swelled, and then fried the gritty paste in a tin plate full of rancid salt pork grease over a campfire. The result was a sizzling, greasy, mud-colored cake, gritty between the teeth and laced with whatever weevils and maggots had been hiding in the original cracker. Soldiers stirred it with their bayonets because there were no spoons. And yet, in the muddy trenches outside Petersburg and through the dark woods of the wilderness, skilly-gally was considered a treat. It was something fried, something hot, and something that almost resembled real food. The bar had fallen that low. Number 6. Cush, the Confederate field stew. While the Yankees fried up Skilly Gully, Lee's men cooked Cush. The recipe was whatever could be thrown into a skillet on the back of a moving column. Bacon grease at the bottom, a handful of cornmeal stirred in, and any meat that could be scavenged along the line of march. Sometimes spoiled beef, sometimes a possum knocked from a tree, sometimes squirrel, sometimes worse. The whole mess was cooked on a ramrod balanced over a smoky fire, often while the army was still moving. Veterans described it as a kind of porky polenta, but in reality, it was usually gritty with sand, sour from bad grease, and only half-cooked because there was no time to wait. The Army of Northern Virginia marched on Cush, and many of its men marched into early graves on the strength of it. Number 5. Embalmed beef. The very phrase made men shudder. War contractors, growing rich on lucrative government deals, packed cheap cuts of beef in barrels with saltpeter and other chemical compounds that soldiers swore included something close to formaldehyde. When the crates were pried open in camps along the Mississippi and in the trenches of Virginia, the meat slid out green, slimy, and stinking of chemicals so sharp they burned the eyes. Entire regiments fell sick within hours of eating it. Men collapsed by their tents, vomiting, doubled over with dysentery, soaking their blankets with diarrhea so violent it left them too weak to stand the next morning. While the contractors counted their profits in fine hotel rooms, the soldiers who ate their poisoned beef were carried to mass graves behind the field hospitals. Number 4. Mule and horse meat at Vicksburg. For 47 days in the summer of 1863, Union artillery hammered the city of Vicksburg into rubble while Grant's lines tightened like a noose. Inside the besieged town, food simply ran out. Confederate soldiers, defending their last hold on the Mississippi, slaughtered their own draft animals one by one. The proud cavalry horses, the sturdy artillery mules, the wagon teams that had hauled their cannon through every campaign, all went under the knife. In the public market of Vicksburg, mule meat hung from hooks and sold for $1 a pound, displayed right beside neatly dressed rats. The meat was tough, stringy, and tasted, men said, exactly like the sweat-soaked harness leather the animals had worn for years. Officers and enlisted men stood in the same lines, eating the same rations, while shells screamed overhead. Number 3. Rats from the Vicksburg meat market. By the final days of the siege, even mule was a luxury. The butcher stalls of Vicksburg displayed rows of skinned rats hanging by their tails, selling for $2.50 to $3.50 each, an enormous sum in Confederate currency. Major S.H. Lockett, an engineer in the city's defenses, wrote that soldiers ate them with the relish of epicures, savoring the meat as if it were fine game. One soldier kept a grim diary tally, marking off every category of food the city had consumed. All the beef, all the mules, all the dogs, all the rats. Civilians, driven out of their shelled homes, dug caves into the yellow hillsides and roasted skewered rats over coals beside the soldiers, sharing the same trench fare in the dying days of a starving city. Number 2. Acorn and chicory coffee. The Union naval blockade, that great iron ring squeezing every port from Norfolk to New Orleans, choked off the South's supply of real coffee almost overnight. To caffeine-starved Confederates, this was nearly as cruel as the lack of bread. Soldiers and Southern housewives improvised. They roasted acorns until they were black, ground them, and brewed them in tin cups. They tried peanuts, sweet potatoes, dried okra seeds, even cotton seeds and dandelion roots. The result was a bitter, gritty, brown liquid that scoured the stomach and tasted, by one Georgia soldier's account, like burnt dirt strained through a boot. They drank it anyway every morning, holding tin cups in cold hands and pretending it was the real thing. Mockingly, the men in gray called the genuine northern brew Lincoln coffee, a small bitter joke around every campfire. Number 1. Parched corn, the last ration. When every barrel was empty, when no hardtack came down the road, when the salt pork had run out and even the mules and rats were gone, soldiers were given handfuls of raw, dry corn kernels straight off the cob. They held them over the fire until the kernels blackened and split, then chewed them slowly with whatever teeth they had left. The kernels swelled in empty stomachs, cracked weakened molars, and caused agonizing constipation and intestinal blockages that left men curled in agony along the roadside. In April of 1865, as Lee's beaten army staggered west toward Appomattox, parched corn was nearly all they had. Men dropped out of column with cramps so severe they could not rise. Some died on the roadside, killed not by Union bullets, but by the last, hardest ration of the war. It was that, or nothing. In the end, the rifle and the cannon were not the deadliest weapons of the Civil War. The ration box was. Disease, born of foul water, rotten meat, vitamin-starved bodies, and chronic dysentery, killed more soldiers than every battle from Bull Run to Appomattox combined. Scurvy loosened their teeth. Dysentery hollowed them out. Chronic diarrhea drained them until they could no longer hold a rifle. More than 400,000 men died of disease in those 4 terrible years, nearly twice the number killed in combat. They were not slain by mini balls or grape shot. They were slain by hardtack and worm castles, by embalmed beef and rancid salt horse, by green slime and parched corn. Out of all 10 foods you have just seen, which one would you refuse first, even with starvation closing in around you?